Oliver Pichwan Luthier here, and today I'm going to cut the sides to length, make the tail and heel blocks, and shape them and put them in. So I'll show you how I do that. So first of all, I have my mold set up in here, and what I do is I place the side in here where it goes, and when it's nice and snug I can make a mark right at the midline of the body by following the the seam here on the mold. So once I've done that, I make a mark there, and then I mark it square. So the trick to cutting these is to cut them so that they are absolutely square. You see a lot of instruments where they put in like an inlay strip right there at the tail to show, you know, to cover the seam. And my theory on that is that a lot of people do that in order to cover up a bad joint. And I like to have that joint just as tight as can be. So the way I cut those is I have a block here, and I've made another block of wood that I use quite a bit. And this piece of cherry has these two edges are absolutely perfectly square. I've cut them so that they're perfectly square. So what I do is I take the side that I'm going to cut and that I've marked. I'll mark that. So I take this, I've marked this already, so I'll mark it on this inside, and I have a mark here that I've made, and that mark I'm going to put here on this block, and then I'm going to set this other block, and I even have it marked with a little arrow here so I know that this is my best square edge, and I set it right on top of that pencil line there so that I can, where I'm going to cut it. And then I put a clamp on this, on both sides of it, like this, and get this thing in so I have it exactly where I want it to cut. So if I want to cut off half of that pencil line, I have it right there, and then I tighten these up. Now I've got this pretty tight, which is sort of flattened that area of the side, and I can take my saw and hold the saw against this block of cherry, and I know then that it's going to cut perfectly square to this face here so that I'll have a good joint. And I just hold it on there to make sure it doesn't wobble or give me any trouble. I know that I go to a fair amount of trouble to make this joint absolutely perfect because I like to see it. I like to see the way that I've been able to book match the ends of the pieces. So there it's cut. And then we can see that we've got an absolutely straight cut that's perfectly square to the side, and it's going to make a beautiful joint when we get it all in there. So, and there's no breaking through or tearing out on the other side. It's an absolutely perfect joint. Perfect. Absolutely straight and perfect. So now what I'm going to do is put these sides in here. I've cut them both already. So these are the sides that are going in there. I'm going to loosen these up a little bit so that because it's pretty snug. And you can hear that little snap when it goes in there, which is a nice sound. So there they are. They're in there. And then I can tighten these up. The sides are in there, and they're cut absolutely perfectly. And the joint is just absolutely, you can see the joint there in there. it is just as tight and as good as possible. So that's what we want. Now the tail block is a little thinner. It's only 5/8 of an inch thick. And I round the edges on the tail block. Let me see if I can get the camera so it's looking at this better. There we go. So the tail block here has got a curve in it on the bottom, and I've rounded the tops like this for weight issues, and it's going to sit right in there like that. It's going to get glued in there right like that. So what I do is I take it over to my sander and I sand it so it's roughly the right size, and then once I've got that, I put in I have a piece of sandpaper here, and I put a piece of duct tape on the back of it so that it doesn't tear easily, and I set it there like this, and I put the block right where it goes, and then I draw this underneath it to sand off the bottom, and do this a number of times until I know that the joint is going to be absolutely perfect. It'll meet with this other piece perfectly. So I do this a few times. When you're drawing it through, be careful that you don't lift this and pull it up that way, because if you do, you're going to round this edge on this and it's not going to be as good joint. So when you pull it through, pull it down slightly. And then that way the back of it is against your side, but the grit part is not going to round off the front edge of your block. So when we have this right where we want it, right there, and we can see that that's an absolutely tight, perfect joint there. These are steps that a lot of people don't do. When we glue this in, we also want to set it back just slightly from the edge of the side, because we're going to sand that down on to get it absolutely flat for the top, and then the radius, of course, for the back. So I've marked this on both sides where the midline of the block is, and that way I can place the block so that it goes right on line with the joint. I can look on both sides and line that up. And once I've lined that up, the next step is going to be I'll mark that with a pencil where it goes, like this. That's where it goes. And then I'll put some tape down so when I glue it in, I don't have a mess to deal with later. So I just put some tape right there. And that's going to be right on that edge of it. That looks good. There has been a fair amount of discussion about tail blocks and heel blocks in terms of the grain of the way the grain should go. And I have heard arguments both ways. Some people feel that the grain of the heel and tail block should not be running perpendicular to the sides, but should be parallel to the sides, so that the grain of the block would be going like that rather than like this. I prefer it this way, and I prefer it for a couple of reasons. The other reason is that the heel block, which is going to go up here, which I've already made, and you probably notice that the heel block is quite a different shape than the tail block. It's a lot thicker, and the reason for that is that this, once it's glued in place, I'm going to cut a dovetail in it, and the dovetail is what's going to hold the neck on to the body. And so we need a fair amount of a little bit more beef up here, because we're going to cut out a dovetail out of that piece. So anyway, we can glue this piece on now, this tail block, and we also want to glue the joint. So to avoid gluing this to our mold, I have a couple of pieces of plastic from an old kitchen cutting board, you know, those real thin plastic cutting boards. And so I'm going to just slide this in there so it's right underneath the joint there, like that. It's very thin, and then that way when I put glue in there, I'm not going to glue the sides to my mold. I'll put one up here too. There's one on the top too. Get those nice and snug. Boy, that is really going to be a nice joint. So everything looks like it's lined up perfectly. So we're ready to glue that in there. I've got my glue here heated up to 150 degrees, my hot hide glue. I've heard that some people talk about hide glue. They're talking about the kind that comes in a bottle that's already mixed up and you don't have to heat it. And my experience with that glue is it's not very good glue. It doesn't work very well. So I advise not using it. So in order to get the glue to go into that joint, I'm going to put a couple clamps here on this side here to hold these sides from moving, like that. And then I'm going to open this up, and that's going to give us some space in between there. As you can see, we've got some space right in between there so that we can get some glue in there. So we're going to take this hot hide glue and I'm going to get it down in that joint. I'm going to just fill it up in there. Okay, so that it's really down in there between this, so it's going to be between those two pieces. Now we can get those two pieces lined up perfectly, and we can tighten it up, our mold, the screw on our mold, and that gets that joint just as tight as can be, which is what we want. Now I'll put some glue, more glue here. And that tape also tells us exactly where we want to put this block, so it doesn't go sliding one way or the other. And I find the grain on these blocks going in the direction that I have this one in is really superior, and I like it better. I haven't had any issues with sides splitting or coming apart or doing anything strange. So I've set the block back from this edge of the face about 1/8 of an inch. And that's important to keep track of, because we're going to need to make sure that we do the same thing on the top side of the heel block, that we have it so that they're going to be where we want them to be. So there, just clamp that down. One clamp there, and I'll put another clamp on the other side, clamping it right to the mold. Now the block is a little bit beyond where the mold is, so I'm going to take a couple of little clamps and place them here on the back side, just between the side and the block. So I'm actually just clamping this right to that area there, because I want to make sure there's some flexibility in these things, and I want to make sure that there are no issues with gaps. We want it just as tight as we can get it. So there, now we've glued that on. So I'm going to glue this top block on in the same fashion. I'm going to sand it, make sure that it sits flush in there, and it'll look just pretty much like this. I'll pull that tape off in about an hour once the glue really sets up enough where it's not going to smear all over everything. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. There's the tail block glued in, and it's also, you know, the two sides are being glued together in this mezzo tenor ukulele. If you enjoyed it, give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Bye bye for now.